Welcome back, mining community. Hope we're all well. So we have another episode, and today's guest is Scott Hicks, who's the VP of Corporate Development and Communications for Luminex Resources, a Vancouver-based Canadian base and precious metals exploration and development company focused on the Condor Gold and Copper project in Ecuador. Over the last decade, Scott has worked in a variety of equity and debt and advisory assignments in Canada and Australia. And he's here today to talk about the company, the projects they're involved in, and the commodity outlook. So let's welcome Scott to the podcast. How you doing, Scott?
Hey, pretty good. Thanks for having me, Rob.
No, and I appreciate your time as well. So wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your career, obviously within the industry, from perhaps when you graduated to sort of current day. So the audience around the world knows a little bit about the guest.
Yeah, sure. So, I was in investment banking for about 10 years. I was at BMO and then RBC. So, two pretty Canadian focused mining shops, and really kind of cut my teeth in mining deals in the banking space. About 5 years ago, I decided to move over to what we call the Lumina Group here. That's Ross Beaty's development company. So for those of you who don't know, Ross Beaty, he's the founder of Pan American Silver, Equinox Gold, Altera Power. So some pretty large companies. We're his development group. So, our strategy is typically to, de-risk early stage projects and then look to sell them to large mining companies. So I've been doing that for about 5 years now, and we've made a lot of progress in Ecuador and in Finland during that time across our three public companies.
Yeah, we've actually had Ross Beaty on the podcast. So
have you? Okay.
So that was probably about a year and a half ago, I'd say. So yeah, we had Ross and had a very interesting chat with him. So I suppose on that, and obviously it's his development arm of his business. How much interaction and influence does he have on the company, and obviously senior management like yourself, and obviously the interaction he has with you and advice that you can provide?
Yeah, I mean, quite a bit. So he's not formally on the board, but he owns 20% of Lumina Gold, 20% of Luminex, and 10% of our third company, Strategic Resources. So, he's obviously a large shareholder, participates pro rata in all the financings, attends, most board meetings, and certainly has a pretty deep impact on, what the group's focus is as far as what commodities we focus on. I mean, when we put Lumina Gold together back in 2014, that was really based on him wanting to do what we did in the copper space, when gold was around 1100, his thesis that gold was going to get back up to kind of 1700, which obviously we're through now, and his thesis that Ecuador was going to become a much better place for mining going forward. So that kind of high level strategic thinking is definitely what directs the group.
Just wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about the Lumina Group of companies, because obviously you mentioned there's a few companies within the group, and possibly some of the projects that you're involved in.
Yeah, sure. So, I'll start with kind of the largest and most advanced company. So Lumina Gold has the Cangrejos project, which is down in southwest Ecuador. It's the largest gold deposit in Ecuador on a primary gold basis, and it's one of the largest gold deposits you'll find in the world. So it's sitting at about 17 million ounces of gold right now and about 2.2 billion pounds of copper. So it's a large gold copper porphyry. We've done 2 PEA studies on it, and right now we're doing all the drilling to take it to a PFS. So that's our most advanced project. Now, to get that ready for an eventual sale and kind of to create a single asset vehicle, we spun all the rest of our projects in Ecuador out into a second company called Luminex Resources, and that really took all the other properties. So at one point when it was all together, we were the second largest landholder in Ecuador, and all those kind of partnerships, and then our Condor Gold project, which you mentioned at the start, that's what's sitting in Luminex right now. So Condor is about a 6.6 million ounce gold deposit with a couple different areas on it. So it's quite a large scale gold project as well in its own right. And then we have partnerships on the copper side in Ecuador with a variety of groups. So we have BHP drilling one of our projects there right now. We have a partnership with Anglo American, and we have a partnership with JOGMEC, which is basically the Japanese government. And those are all working on 3 separate copper properties. So that's kind of the Ecuador portfolio. And then the third company, which is our smallest, is Strategic Resources. And this was a bit of a play on, a couple of years back, we had the view that we would see adoption of these vanadium redox batteries and really, increased steel standards in China and a bit more demand on that front. And it's a small market. So, we thought if we could get some interesting assets in the vanadium space, that would be a great way to play the battery side. And COVID did slow it down a little bit, but we are starting to see some increased adoption on those grid scale batteries right now, and some pretty interesting things happening in that space. So that was the thinking on that company, and obviously kind of putting tier 1 jurisdictions in there, low risk jurisdictions, because it is a bit more of a niche metal. So we don't want to complicate a story with that. So that's why we picked Finland for our 2 assets that we have in that company.
Okay, and Ecuador, what was, I suppose, attractive that particular, obviously, country and jurisdiction compared to maybe some of the other South American countries? What was, I suppose, unique about Ecuador, and why you decided to sort of focus on that country?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I mean, the group's history across all the Lumina copper companies back in the day was, extensive work in Peru, Chile, Argentina, and obviously Ecuador is the same, geology in the same belt there. The only difference was it's really never been properly explored, and part of that was, it is a bit more forested, so it's not as easy as, say, the Atacama Desert to see outcrop or whatnot. And then the other thing, which was probably more important, is the government was, during the late 2000s and into kind of maybe 2013, basically against new mining concessions in the country. And, they had very restrictive tax policies that made it quite difficult to develop a mine there. And, the Correa government, which is the one who actually put in the restrictions, they really did a reversal in 2013, 2014, started to look at how to open the country back up. I think they realized they'd missed the last mining super cycle. The outlook for oil at the time had diminished quite a bit. Obviously, this month it's not the case, but that was kind of when oil had really fallen down, and a big part of their GDP had fallen with it. So we saw that was potentially going to turn, and the country just hadn't had any systematic exploration in kind of the modern day, right? So Cangrejos and Lumina Gold was our first acquisition. We had about half the deposit at that time. It was an old Newmont project, so that was kind of our toehold into the country. And then we acquired the Condor project. We consolidated 100% of Cangrejos. And then when they opened up the staking system in 2016 to new concessions for the first time, we went with our database from our predecessor company and staked all these prospective, both gold and copper properties throughout Ecuador.
And with Ecuador, obviously, this podcast is listened to a number of people around the world. I think we're in 170 countries. So with Ecuador, what's it like to actually, I suppose, mine in Ecuador, especially if a company was looking to sort of explore there? How is it compared to probably some of the other South American countries that are surrounding? And I suppose also their mining regulations, etc., and also their communities.
Sure. So, I'll start with kind of the best parts, which is, the infrastructure in Ecuador is excellent. So the vast majority of their power is from hydro. So, stable, reliable, cheap power throughout the country, which is obviously very important for mining. There's a lot of water available for mining. And, the road system is very, very good. And a lot of that was done by the previous Correa government with, they did a good job of reinvesting all the oil, agriculture, and tourism proceeds into the country. So anyway, the infrastructure is excellent. The permitting situation with the new concessions to start drilling and exploring there was a bit difficult, I would say, in 2016, 2017. I think it was 2018, maybe off by a year, where they brought in the Scout drilling program, and that was really a response to the government realizing, people aren't able to drill easily here because you used to have to get a full environmental permit to drill at all. So what we'll do is we'll give them a small amount of platforms. It's actually, about 30 platforms you can drill off of, and then you can go explore because, obviously a lot of these programs don't work out. There's not a deposit, and people, will give the concessions back to the government. So they put that in place, and really that allowed for earlier stage drilling. So that's been positive on that side of things. Now, the actual permitting of mines, we've seen 2 large mines get built in Ecuador now. Mirador, which is operated by Tongling, Chinese company, and then Fruta del Norte, which is a world-class deposit that's actually contiguous with our Condor deposit there. And that they've both got finished in late 2019. So, the permitting process for those to actually, once they were done feasibility to get into production, was pretty fast in the scheme of global mining. And I think the country is really starting to see the benefits to GDP from those 2 large-scale projects kind of being online. So that's been good. Community-wise, obviously we see in a lot of countries, a broad brush applied to the whole country, which, as we know, is never really the case, right? So, where Cangrejos and where Condor are, we think those are the best provinces for ore mining in the country. Where Condor is, obviously, it's where 2 mines have just been built. Where Cangrejos is in southwest Ecuador, it's a fairly commercial area. There's already, a deep sea port right there. People are shipping concentrate out of that area. There's a lot of agriculture. There's a lot of shrimp farming. So the area has been kind of terraformed already. Now if you go to the west side of the country, the east side of the country, there's a bit more in the way of indigenous groups. If you get up into Cuenca, some of the higher elevation areas there's been a bit more project specific resistance to mining. So you really do have to kind of dial into what areas of the country are you focused on, and what are the very localized community issues there. So at Cangrejos, the camp's been there for, call it 20 years. At Condor, the camp's been there for 30 years. So, they're well established areas where we have the social license to do work. But any investors that are listening should definitely, ask those questions of the companies they're thinking of investing in, because every area is a little bit different.
Yeah. Obviously, talking about investors, what stages are some of your projects at? And also, why should investors look at your assets now to potentially invest?
Yeah, so I'll break that up. Maybe when I'll group kind of Lumina and Luminex, and I think Ecuador has been off people's maps, and that is changing a bit. But when I started with the group in 2017. A lot of investors would just say, a flat no to Ecuador without really looking at the assets. So there's definitely a bit of a discount in the market to Ecuadorian projects, and I think that will continue to change over time. Especially, we've seen not only Ecuador improve, but also some of the surrounding countries really become less desirable in some ways. I mean, we've got Chile talking about raising the taxes on copper. We've got Peru having a fairly difficult leftist government, and just operating and permitting drilling there is becoming a lot more difficult. So I think Ecuador continues to look better on that front. And then I think that from a commodity mix point of view, most of the deposits in the country are gold, copper. I mean, obviously we're very constructive on both. Everything that's happened in the monetary system plus inflation really leads you to gold, and then obviously the energy transition and declining grades in the copper space really leads you towards copper. So we think at Cangrejos we've got the right mix. It's about 80% gold, 20% copper. Luminex, the assets would be a little bit more separated versus in one deposit as far as the gold, copper, but the company's certainly got the right mix of assets. So I think when investors look across the space at all these different companies, Lumina Gold would certainly be one of the most undervalued in the space, and I think an excellent opportunity to enter a huge world-class deposit at a very reasonable price. I actually ran this the other day because I was curious. So when last time gold was at 1990 when we went through this, I think the company had a market cap of, about $375 million. And today we're sitting at a market cap of about 220. Meanwhile, copper's 50% higher now than when it was last time gold went through 1900. So, we've seen these developer multiples compress, and we're not the only ones. I mean, there's gold plays in Nevada that the multiples have compressed as well, right? But I think, we're getting into that point of the cycle where all these producers are going to be spitting off, an obscene amount of cash at $2,000 gold, and they're going to have to start reinvesting in new projects and greenfield projects, and valuations are reasonable. I mean, you've got huge multiple spreads for these guys to pick up these projects right now. So, I think it's an interesting time to be looking at development. I think Ecuador is continuing to improve, and I think, gold and copper are kind of the right commodities to be in for investors right now.
I know you were keen to speak about sort of the price outlook of commodities. So I just wonder if you can cover those and the reasons for your sort of positive outlook for the industry.
Yeah, sure. So, on gold, I think if you look at kind of consensus views of what the Fed's going to do this year, I think we're between, kind of 5 and 7 rate hikes priced in. My personal view is we see, and I would have said the same thing in 2018 had you asked me, which ended up happening is they went to go to raise rates. It looked like things were going to break, and then they had to reverse course, right? And as soon as they reversed course, what did we see? We saw gold start running in the summer, and then all the way up to basically to new highs there in kind of 2020. I think this time, if they reverse, it's going to be the same. You're going to see a huge run in gold prices as the currency kind of gets debased, right? And potentially, we'll see. But QE stopped yesterday, which is unbelievable, right? That they ran QE into the hottest labor market and the hottest inflation period in my lifetime. So we'll see how long it is till they kind of have to go back to that playbook, right? And it feels like we're kind of one crisis away from them doing it again. So I mean, that's my belief on gold is, you've got stability at these levels. It's kind of established itself, but potential to tick up higher based on monetary policy. Copper, we're just not seeing any new big projects get built, with the exception of probably Ivanhoe coming online in the last while, which is obviously a very large mine, don't get me wrong. But you're just not seeing enough new projects come online, and the amount of copper that's going to be required for fixing the grids, renewable energy, and electric vehicles, it's going to be a very high use situation, and grades are declining in all these places. Even the best mines, whether it's in Chile, other areas of the world, the grades are declining. So they're going to have to, something's got to give, right? And if countries are going to raise taxes, if energy prices are going to be higher in this environment, that's all these things are going to push the cost curve higher, and prices are going to have to respond. So, it's very easy to see a plus $5 copper scenario, and recently we've had investors asking us in the context of Cangrejos, what does the asset look like at $2,000 gold and $10 copper? So it means some people are starting to price in, just much higher copper scenarios than anything we would have thought about as miners previously.
But obviously with the price of copper hopefully rising, I don't think it necessarily affects the projects, because the projects are not out there. The large, big copper deposits are getting harder and harder to find, and the deal flow is not coming through. No matter what the copper price is, all right, they might put a little bit more in, but it's still going to take it's a ridiculous amount of years to build a obviously copper mine, but obviously finding a copper mine, and it obviously has to work to scale. So yeah. It's just literally harder to find these large copper deposits. So I mean, is there, obviously you're involved in copper, is there any other jurisdictions that you may focus on as a company if you were sort of looking at copper?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the group's vast experiences in South America. We actually have a private company where we have some very deep Cooper-Schiefer copper assets in Poland as well. And you're talking kind of 1,500 to 2,000 meters deep, where KGHM is basically mining in Poland now. So we've looked at some things like that. I characterize the group as being pretty opportunistic. So typically, looking for low price entry points for whatever reason, whether it's, the jurisdiction's going to change, whether the metal is out of favor at the time, or, maybe we see something in the deposit that somebody else doesn't. But yeah, we're willing to look in most places. Typically, I'd say the only area we haven't worked in really is Africa, but we've looked kind of everywhere else. And copper's definitely been the focus. Historically, we also had a nickel asset in Guatemala that was a DSO nickel operation. I wish we still had that today based on what happened this week with nickel hitting 100,000 a ton, but such is life. Yeah, so I mean, we'll look at kind of anything that we think makes sense in the current commodity environment.
So what's the company's objectives for this year? Obviously, each company might have their own separate objectives, but what is the objectives for 2022?
Sure. So at Lumina Gold, the focus is really the 30,000 meter drill program, getting it to a PFS level, which we hope to have out in early 2023. And then, if I think at that point, it would be a logical time to, talk to larger parties and see if they're interested in buying the project. It is a very large scale project. It's about $1 billion capex. It's, almost 400,000 ounces a year of gold production, 50 million pounds of copper production a year. So it is a very large scale project. It's also, basically 3 decades of mine life, right? So it's something that we think a major will be interested in once we de-risk it. At Luminex, it's a bit earlier stage. We did put a PEA out on Condor North, which was, about 190,000 ounces of gold production a year for 12 years. Right now, we're drilling in and around that area to add mine life, and then maybe add some more high grade underground to that and help improve the project. It's about a $400 million NPV at $1,600 gold. So, it was a starting place, and we're going to work to improve that. And then in that company, we're also waiting, for the majors to do their work, right? BHP is drilling with 2 rigs. Anglo's starting to drill in Q3 this year. They've got, 8 porphyry deposits they wanted to target. So there's a lot going on there that's, we're not the operator, but it's within Luminex and happening. And strategic, we're advancing some permitting right now for a brownfields vanadium project that we bought that used to produce about 10% of the world's vanadium. So it's a vanadium pig iron asset. And then, we're also looking at M&A and strategic. So looking at, ways to still add vanadium assets to the platform. We think it's kind of early days in that space. We saw Largo do something pretty interesting in the last month here. They've announced a physical vanadium trust that they're going to raise about 20 million bucks for and start trading. And they're going to hold vanadium in that they're going to lease into their battery production. Which is kind of a neat angle because a lot of these people who are buying batteries, they don't want the high upfront cost, and a lot of the cost profile of the battery is the actual vanadium itself. So they're going to employ a leasing model, and the reason you can lease it is because these batteries don't degrade, right? So over a 25-year period, you don't get any degradation. And you can sell and recycle the vanadium all at the end of a battery life. So they're a bit unique that way. They're 1 element batteries, and they're not batteries you're going to see in a car, but you'll see them attached to a wind turbine or a solar farm or things of that nature. So we think it's kind of early days in the vanadium space, and then a lot of these vanadium deposits will have high grade pig iron potential with them if they're these VTM style deposits, and obviously what we've seen in that space is very positive lately with prices north of $600 a ton for pig iron. So definitely some of those projects will come into play in the next few years.
And lastly, what else has the group been focusing on in the mining space? I know obviously you're involved in other things as well, so I just wonder if you can give us an overview of that.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the group historically, prior to my time, they had a little kind of hedge fund set up. The group has a very investor-focused nature. So, we've launched a couple helped launch a couple companies recently where we've put some money to work. One of them is called Anacortes Mining. It's a gold project in Peru, right next to Lagunas Norte, that Barrick just sold. They actually just put out a PEA this week on just the oxide portion of the resource. So that's one that Marshall has been advising, and we've obviously put some money into. Another one is, and it's early days, is Atacama Copper. So I'm on the board of that, and that's Chilean copper properties the main properties between El Morro and Relincho, which is the Nueva Union that's owned by Newmont and Teck as a 50-50 JV. And then, that company's going to look at other M&A in Chile. So those are two other ones that we've, helped kind of incubate recently. And, we'll look to continue to do that with management teams and projects that we think, deserve capital.
Scott, really appreciate your time and give us an overview of obviously the group and the various companies within the group. And again, explaining to us a little bit about Ecuador, mining in Ecuador. If our audience wants to reach out to you, if they've got any questions they may have, not necessarily just on Ecuador, but obviously the Lumina Group overall, wondered how can they actually go about that, and are you across any social media platforms?
Yeah, I mean, obviously all the companies are on Twitter. I myself am on Twitter, and I don't know if you have a comment section, but we could, or a description section, but we can throw that up there. But definitely visit any of the websites: luminagold.com, luminexresources.ca, and Strategic Res, and they all have contact sections and investor decks up there if your listeners are more interested. And like I said, all the companies are on Twitter, so I'll get you that information and we can post it for your listeners.
Yeah, certainly. We can include that in the show notes that will accompany this podcast. Yeah, so really appreciate your time. You may want to come on later this year or next year to give us a further update. And for all our audience listening around the world, appreciate your continued support. Keep sharing this episode or this podcast, and particularly this episode, amongst people within the industry. Whether you're interested in South America or not, it's certainly a sort of an interesting story, especially with a jurisdiction that hasn't necessarily been in the spotlight. And I suppose they're the jurisdictions that we should really focus on, the ones that are not in the spotlight, especially if you're looking to invest. So appreciate your continued support. And until next time, happy mining.